Thanks, Russ. My name's Chris Davis, and I have the honor of introducing my friend, Senator Bill Hagerty. A lot of you have had the opportunity to meet Bill, and I have to say, Bill, we're incredibly lucky to have such a principled conservative with Tennessee values representing us in D.C. Now, folks, I can tell you how Bill serves on the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. I can talk about how Bill serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or the Rules Committee. We can talk about how Bill led the state of Tennessee in economic development, and we went from being a state with higher than average unemployment to a state of the year for economic development 2 years in a row. We can talk about Bill being the ambassador to Japan, speaking Japanese fluently. We can even go way, way back, long before my time, and talk about the influence that Bill's hardworking mother and father had on him. But I'd rather share a story that I believe sums up the character of Bill Hagerty and why we're so lucky to have you as our senator. And Frankie Lax can tell you all about Bill. They've been friends for many years. I think Bill called you from Japan to let you know he's going to be running for the Senate. But most of you know that last year was probably the most difficult year I've ever experienced. I lost my dad. He was my hero. Everything that I've done or accomplished, done in politics, to lawyering, being a good friend, a son, a husband, and a father, was to make him proud. So in many ways, last year I felt like a ship without a sail. My dad fought for 8.5 weeks. He was tough as nails. And during that time, I was handling my business, handling his business, doing everything I could to be there for my mother and be there for my wife, who was pregnant with our second child, Eleanor. Bill called or texted about every week. He let me know that he was thinking about me and praying for my family. He would tell me stupid lawyer jokes to make me laugh. He would listen to my pain, and he shared with me what it was like when he lost his dad and how we have to keep going for them. He didn't have to do that. I'm not important. I'm not a big shot. I'm just a small town lawyer who grew up in a cotton field. But those calls and texts mean a lot to me, because I know those first few weeks in D.C. For a freshman member of the Senate or the House are incredibly busy. And I know that Bill had some very serious and difficult political decisions to make. And he had to take some pretty tough votes right off the bat. I mean, he was thrown right into the fire. So I know those calls and texts were deliberate. He had to make that time to talk to me, time he didn't have, and I'll never forget that. But you see, Bill had something called character. I'm sure all of us know someone who became a person we no longer recognize after experiencing success in business or politics. I certainly have watched that firsthand. That's not Bill Hagerty. After all his success in business, all his success in politics, Bill never forgot where he came from, and he never forgot who he is. Money might talk, but character matters. And Bill, my friend, you have it in spades. And that's why it's such an honor for me to introduce him, my friend and the senator from the greatest state in the country, Bill Hagerty.
Chris, I don't have a tear in my eye. That was work. But thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's wonderful to be back here with so many good friends. I look across this room. It really is great to be here with you. Chairman Scott Golden, I'm glad to see you here. Ron, thank you for inviting me and inviting half the room, it sounds like, to come. It's good to see you here with your brother Carl. My good friend Frankie Lax, it's always great to see you. Frank and I have known each other for many, many years, and just a wonderful, reliable friend. Chris, thank you for being such a good friend as well. I know you've gone through a lot, but you have character in spades, my friend, as well. So I wish you all the best. I thought what I might do is just take a few minutes and cover a bit of what's happening in Washington on the international front, on the domestic front, and then just open it up for questions, if that would be okay with you all, because I'd love to hear from you, probably more than you'd like to hear from me. On the international front, Chris mentioned I serve on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but before that I was the ambassador to Japan. In fact, I think I'm the only member of the United States Senate who actually was an ambassador, who was a diplomat. And I bring a particular viewpoint and perspective to what's happening around the world. And I think right now we are all watching very, very carefully what's happening with Ukraine. Russia's got more than 100,000 troops stacked up on that border. It looks as though something's going to happen, and I think it may happen very soon. The ground is frozen there. Those conditions will only be present to probably mid-March. After that, when the ground thaws, gets very muddy, it would be much more difficult to execute whatever Vladimir Putin may have in mind. The State Department here has already begun to evacuate people. Unfortunately, we don't have an ambassador in Ukraine. That hasn't been a priority for this administration, but someone has made the call for people to evacuate the embassy. That will, in and of itself, set off some degree of concern and perhaps even panic. So I hope that they're managing that process well. But I think it tells you that the State Department's read of the situation is pretty dire. How do we get there? Well, I think the very first step happened on the first day of the new administration when the Keystone XL pipeline was cut off, when the decision was made to stop allowing drilling on federal lands, to basically wage war on the oil and gas industry here in America. What that did was it caused gas prices to rise around the world. It caused a shortage. And it's caused a great difficulty in terms of these firms being able to get financed to further grow. What does that do? Price of oil goes up. Russia is the second largest oil producer in the world. Their revenues go up. They're flush with cash. They now have more capacity to do more in the world, and they don't have necessarily the best interest of the rest of the world at heart when they do that. At the same time, we had a situation in our southern border. The southern border collapsed. We've proven unwilling to defend our southern border, so why would we defend any other nation's border? There's something called the START Treaty. That was the nuclear negotiations that have been ongoing between Russia and the United States. The previous administration, we wanted to get more of the non-conventional weapons into that treaty. So we held off signing that treaty. We wanted to have our leverage to get that done. This administration came in and gave them a 5-year extension. They got nothing for it. Things are looking pretty good for Vladimir Putin at this point. Then Russian hackers attacked the Colonial Pipeline here in America. You know what that did to gas prices? Again, this is all working in his favor, right? There were no repercussions for that. In fact, our president showed up with a list of 16 industries and wagged his finger at President Putin and said, you shouldn't attack these industries. Well, I can tell you that's probably the hit list for what they're going after initially, and I don't know what kind of message it sends about the rest of our economy that wasn't on that list. The message should have been clear. We will not tolerate anybody attacking our industry, whether it's by cyber attack or by physical attack. But that's not what Vladimir Putin heard. And then you got the situation with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We blocked that. That was leverage. Congressionally mandated waivers thrown out the door, congressionally mandated sanctions thrown out the door. He was given a waiver to complete the pipeline. It is now complete. It's just awaiting permitting at this point. This is what Vladimir Putin has been looking at. This is the deck of cards that he's been dealt over the past year. Everything is working to his advantage. And then Afghanistan. The world watched what happened in Afghanistan. Vladimir Putin saw that. President Xi Jinping saw that. The Ayatollahs in Iran saw that. Kim Jong-un in North Korea saw that. Every one of our adversaries is emboldened now. And they saw that happen. I think they figured this is the time to act. I'll take you back to 2014. It's the last time this happened with the Soviet Union, with Putin looking at the old Soviet Union, thinking about how he could reconfigure parts of it. It was the Sochi Olympics then, it's Beijing Olympics now. And he moved right after the Sochi Olympics to take Crimea. And the Obama-Biden administration did nothing. So we're back in a situation again that's got us all very concerned. I hope and pray that Putin steps back, recalculates, thinks hard about what may happen. There's a lot of griping and complaining 4 or 5 years ago when President Trump said that NATO should be stepping up their defenses. They should actually pay their toll. 2% of GDP is the pledge. Several of those companies had a hard time getting, even countries had a hard time even getting to 1%. And now what's happened? Who's looking at a NATO that's not united? He's looking at a NATO that's having a hard time deciding what it's going to do about defending their periphery now. So again, looking back isn't what I want to spend all of our time doing today, but we were dealing from a position of strength. We weren't seeing this type of behavior. In just 1 year, we found ourselves in a very, very challenging situation internationally. We can talk more about that during the Q&A session, but that's a bit of what's happening. The most imminent threat, I think, there in Russia and Ukraine. Domestically, we are the strongest economy in the world, but there have been several things that have caused that economy to waver. The pandemic, of course, is the biggest one, and that's been going on for now, 2.5 years at this point. We've got to put it in our rearview mirror. And the Congress funded billions upon billions of dollars to deal with this. Yet we're running short on therapeutics. We can't find tests and PPE. And we're really going to have some accountability here in America, given the amount of money that we put in place. Just in March of this year, $1.9 trillion in so-called pandemic relief. And we can't find therapies. We haven't produced them. We have shortages of everything that we need right now. This doesn't make sense. And again, accountability is what's required. Control of the gavel is what's necessary to get that accountability. I feel confident that we will have control of the gavel back in the United States Senate after the November elections, but it's going to be a hard time holding anyone accountable until then. With respect to the economy here domestically, again, I'll come back to what we've done. America had finally become energy independent. What does that mean? We can control our own destiny with respect to one of the biggest elements of our economy. A key input factor for many industries here in America is energy, whether it's using natural gas, whether it's using energy to transport goods. We took a different step. We took a different course back in late January of this past year. Rather than being energy independent, where we could actually help our allies. I mean, I worked my heart out when I was ambassador to Japan to get them to buy liquid natural gas from America, rather than from the Russians or the Qataris. Why? Because energy independence meant we could help secure our national security and that of our allies. They put billions of dollars into place into infrastructure to be able to import more of our LNG. But now we're cutting off that ability. Russia's in a position to threaten Germany and Europe right now. If we were in a position to supply LNG in place of Russia, we'd be in a better strategic posture, wouldn't we? But that's not the path that we took. Instead, we've taken on a war against the oil and gas industry here in America. Just go to the gas pump, you see what the inflationary impact of that is. And it's not transitory, I hate to inform you. These are words coming out of Washington. This is just a transitory thing. That is a permanent increase in the cost of transporting goods, the cost of making a lot of goods, that is done strictly because of the policy decisions that were made in Washington. We've got to realize that there are national security implications for this, economic security implications for this. We've put ourselves in a terrible position because of the very short-sighted policies that have been undertaken against the oil and gas industry. They even want to use financial regulations to choke off funding to these industries. So that's very, very challenging. If you think about what's happening in our cities, crime is through the roof. It's a real issue. People don't feel safe. This snatch and grab that's going on and forced retailers to shut down across the country. And our southern border is probably the largest national security crisis that I've seen in my lifetime. What's happening at our southern border. We don't know who's coming across, what diseases they may carry, what countries they're coming from, what ill will they have toward America in their hearts. They've actually apprehended a couple of million people coming across the border. The gotaways, nobody knows the number. The estimates is probably 2 million have been apprehended, another million at least have gotten through. That's a problem. It's a problem for every one of our cities. What does it mean for our infrastructure? We don't know what it means for our schools, for our hospitals, for our law enforcement, because this government, the federal government, will not tell us where they're sending these people in the dark of night. They're going somewhere. This is a real concern. And if you talk with law enforcement officers across Tennessee, like I do every day, they will tell you that month after month, we're seeing more fentanyl coming across the border and into our state and into our children than ever before. Each month sets a new record of overdoses and deaths. And now the largest cause of death for young Americans is overdoses from this fentanyl coming from China into Mexico and across our southern border into America. It's a crisis, and nothing is being done about it. So we have big challenges ahead of us. We've got to stand for something. President Biden suggested this at his press conference last Wednesday. And I can tell you what I stand for. I stand for strong borders. I stand for energy independence again. For low crime, supporting our police and our troops, and for a strong America. It's important not only for us, but it's important for our allies around the world. We know that's possible. And I hope President Biden, as he resets his thoughts for this coming year, will take account of that. I'm going to be sending that message loud and clear in Washington, and I appreciate the help and support that you all have given me to do that. So to turn to a more positive note, though, before I open it up for questions, it's wonderful to be back home here in Tennessee. We're setting a great example here in Tennessee for the rest of the nation. And if you think about what's happening with our economy, as you all know, we've seen Tennessee come from a place after the last recession where we were in the bottom half of most of the metrics. We did have a higher unemployment rate than the national average when I came to be the economic development chief. You know, our GDP growth was lower than the rest of the nation. Wage growth lower. We've turned that around here in Tennessee. Working together with so many of you in this room, we've turned that around. And I think what's happening at the mega site right now is just underscores the success that Tennessee is going to enjoy, that this part of Tennessee is going to enjoy, with Ford and SK coming in with massive investments. I was talking to the general contractor that's going to be building the facilities out there at the beginning of this week, and he told me, first he asked me if I knew the size of the Ford operation that was the initial plant in Detroit. It's where sort of the biggest Ford operation is, probably the biggest car operation when it all started. 700 acres, he told me, that's big. He said, Bill, do you know how big the operation is going to be, how many acres we acquired at the mega site? I said, I think it's 4,100 acres. You're right. He said, this can grow to something that the world has never seen. And it's going to happen right here in West Tennessee. So the potential for us is just amazing. I was over in Memphis talking with the chairman of the school board and with the superintendent of schools there. We've got to figure out how to inspire our middle school students, our high school students, to take them, to engage with them, to see how their career could be wonderful with businesses like this coming into Tennessee. I spoke with the vice chairman of Ford. I spoke with their president. I've been friends with both of them for a number of years, and told them how excited we were and how much we wanted to get our youth involved, and they were very excited about that too. They said, what's the name of that school superintendent? They flew a team down here to meet with several people. We probably met with them when they were here. John Huntsman was leading that group. I met with them over in Middle Tennessee. But I think there's tremendous potential here. Tennessee just needs to continue to be the shining star for the rest of America. We are setting the pace. And the decision that Ford and SK made, I think, underscores the fact that we've got it together here in Tennessee now. We just keep driving forward. And I'm so optimistic about what can happen here in West Tennessee as a result. So with that, I'd love to open the floor to questions and see if I can answer them. Dr. Kirkman?
Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. Does NATO have an obligation to support Ukraine? And if so, will Germany go along with that obligation?
The answer is no on the first question. Let me pose the question so everybody can hear it in the back. Dr. Kirkland asked if NATO has an obligation to defend Ukraine if they're attacked. And then, so
Would Germany go along?
Would Germany go
NATO?
along with it?
If they don't have an obligation, I guess they have to.
So Germany is the deepest pocket in NATO, particularly now that the UK is sort of out of the EU. There's a friction there. But NATO is obligated to its partners. Ukraine's not a member of NATO. I think they may aspire to become a member of NATO. There have been a number of discussions about that. But it's not imminent that they would join NATO. And there's not a hard and firm obligation. Therefore, there's a strategic interest, though, in what happens in Ukraine because it's their next door neighbor. And the origins of NATO were basically built to defend against the threat of the former Soviet Union. So it's being tested right now. NATO is being tested right now. What they're finding is what Dr. Kirkland mentioned, that they're not unified. The members of NATO are not unified. The newer members from Eastern Europe very much want to come to the aid of Ukraine because they see the threat moving closer and closer to them. Whereas Germany, France, others may have a different perspective on this. I think Germany is more concerned about getting cheap natural gas right now for their industry than they are about any sort of long-term strategic posture. I've done a lot of work in Germany over the years. The corporate interests there seem to take precedence over almost everything else. But there's not unity within NATO right now. Vladimir Putin sees this, and again, that's opportunity for him. Yes?
We hear a lot about the Far East and the Eastern European. What about the Soviet influence in the Middle East? Is that something that's a matter of concern?
Absolutely. Look at Syria. Yeah, Soviet influence in the Middle East is a severe concern, particularly when you think about what's happening in Syria. That neighborhood is not getting as much attention as it should right now. But Iran is the largest state sponsor of terror. The whole area there, I think, needs a lot more attention. After the 11-day war that happened back in 2011, when Hamas was attacking Israel, right after that ended, I flew over to Israel. These are terror groups that are sponsored by Iran that are doing all of this. Their goal, Iran's stated goal, is to destroy Israel and to destroy the great state of America too. We need to take that into account. I'll share a story with you about the way things work with Iran. When I was ambassador to Japan, one of my jobs was to get the Japanese government to stop buying Iranian crude oil. We were tightening up the sanctions on Iran. We were putting ourselves in a better negotiating posture to get them to actually bring their nuclear program where we wanted it to be, which is no nuke in Iran. It worked. It took me months to get the Japanese government to agree not to buy crude oil from Iran. They reminded me a world war was fought over their access to energy. They weren't inclined to kill a 70-year-old relationship because we asked them to, but they did. The Prime Minister of Japan flew to Tehran to tell them personally. Again, long relationship. Perhaps things might change later. He wanted to tell them personally to keep that relationship in some sort of positive position. So he met with their President Rouhani in the afternoon. He goes in the next morning to meet with the Ayatollah to talk with him about it. While Prime Minister Abe is in talking with the Ayatollah, they went out, sent speedboats out, and attached what they call limpet mines to the sides of 2 Japanese flag carrier ships, cargo ships, and they destroyed them. That's who you're dealing with. So this notion that the Biden administration seems to have that we've got to jump back into the old agreement, and the way to do that is through appeasement. Let's stop enforcing the secondary sanctions they call that I worked so hard to impose. They stopped enforcing those. We squeezed Iran's foreign capital accounts down by a factor of 1/10 of what they were in 2018 by 2020. Now they're coming right back up. Wondering why the Iranians don't want to negotiate? Because they're getting what they want. They're getting the revenues that they need. Those revenues are then used to fund terror around the world.
If Russia goes into the Ukraine, Is it likely that we will make a military response with only 8,000 troops in the area? It seems like a mismatch. We're gonna.
Oh, indeed, I mean, they've got, Russia's got over 100,000 troops on that border right now. What Carl asked was, would we respond in kind if Russia attacks Ukraine? How could we justify responding in kind when we won't even defend our own border here in America? How could we possibly justify sending our own boys and girls to fight for Ukraine? They're talking about sanctions. They might impose those. They certainly haven't done a good job of keeping sanctions imposed on Iran, as I just mentioned. There's a lot we can do to their economy, but I think we'd be very hard pressed. I mean, how could we possibly justify stepping into that situation to defend Ukrainian borders when we won't defend America's border? And again, we've been put in a very, very difficult situation by this administration. So NATO is trying to decide what to do. The 8,500 troops are just at the ready. They haven't been deployed. What might they do if they send troops over there? They may be training or doing other things, I don't know, but I think the administration would have a very hard time justifying an action like that, given the fact that they won't even defend our own border. Yeah, Jim?
Thanks, Senator, for your service. We appreciate you. It's an honor to serve you in Nashville.
Yeah.
So you did a good job. With our national deficit well over $20 trillion, how in the world are we going to manage that and pay it back? The liberals are going to just, and the press is going to keep going.
Jimmy Eldridge asked about the national debt. It is now approaching 100% of our GDP. We're right there. In fact, I think it crossed this past year as our economy took a dip. It's a very dangerous level. And I have lived in Japan where they have even much higher debt to GDP, but their debt is owned by the Japanese public. Our debt is owned by a lot of people, other than Americans. It's a real issue, and it's something that's going to require us to bring fiscal responsibility back. I understand, I wasn't in the Congress then, I understand how they wanted to deal with the pandemic, and it was an unprecedented situation to create a bridge to get us through it. A lot of money was spent, that deficit went up as a result. I'm sorry, the deficit went up, and so did our debt. We're close to 30 trillion now. Jimmy, we're right at that threshold now. That's why I think it's been so hard for people like Joe Manchin to see a bill that has another $5 or $6 trillion in it and say that's something we should be doing right now. Another thing that's happening is inflation is running rampant. We're at levels that we haven't seen in 4 decades. You think about the average age of America, many Americans have never seen this, never lived through what we did when Jimmy Carter was president. The inflation that's happening right now is the most pernicious tax that could be imposed on America, period. And it hits everybody. Actually, people in the lowest income brackets feel it hardest. If you think about what's happened to real wages in the past year, wages have gone up on a nominal basis, but inflation has far exceeded the wage increase. So, in effect, real wages have come down since all of this started. And the administration has tried to chalk it up to the pandemic causing supply chain dislocations. Granted, there have been some supply chain dislocations. We feel that. But I think the biggest thing is things like the energy policy, those sorts of things that are creating, inflation. Things like shoving so much money into the economy, giving felons, stimulus checks. All of this stuff is having a massively inflationary impact. And it's also having an impact of making it harder to get folks to come back to work. Every employer that I visit with is having a very hard time getting people to come back to work. And if you want to grow, you need employees to do it. This environment's become very, very challenging. So I think the challenge to us is to get our economy growing again and to slow the rate of government growth well below the rate the economy grows. And that's the way, over a long period of time, we're going to have to address this. But it's not going to be easy. And if that Build Back Better plan had gone through, there were a number of programs in there that would have created more government dependency that could not have been turned off. And again, that would have made the debt situation far, far worse. And how do we explain to our children and our grandchildren that we're going to do this to them? Because that's who's going to have to pick up the bill. I met with the EU ambassadors when I was ambassador to Japan. They were always, again, Japan has got more military stationed there than any place else in the world. When Kim Jong-un was firing rockets over Japan, they all wanted to know me because they wanted to know they could get out, they could evacuate their people. So there's a great deal of interest by all these people to come together to meet to understand what was going on. And I looked at all of them around the room and I said, you know, it's very hard for me to justify to my children how the United States pays between 3.5% and 5.5% of its GDP every year for our national defense. We're in a deficit spending mode right now. We're parking that debt on their backs, and you, pointing to those countries there from Europe, you can't find it in your hearts to spend more than 1%. You're relying on us to defend you. We're subsidizing you so you can subsidize other activities that we don't have in America. That's a hard pill to swallow. They didn't like that message. That's why they hated the past president, I think. But that's the truth. And we need to take these factors into account because we are doing a lot of things around the world, and we need other developed nations to step up.
Absolutely.
David?
Senator, in behalf of Haywood County, and behalf of West Tennessee, I know what you did with regards to helping get Louisville City here and get our hospital back. And I'll just tell y'all all, we all owe him a debt of gratitude because Louisville City will transform West Tennessee for our lifetime. And I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much. There's two things we'll get up. One way I think that we can make a very positive difference, that I can make a positive difference in the Senate, is to find ways to improve our economy, improve opportunities for America, to make this nation the most attractive place in the world to invest capital, just like we've made our state one of the most attractive places. And I'm going to continue to try to find policies to do that. I want to share one piece of legislation with you that you haven't heard about, but that I got it passed 10 days ago with a 100-0 vote. Everyone's heard about the chip shortage, right? If you try to buy a car, you know there's a shortage of chips. If you try to buy an appliance, there's a chip shortage that's causing all kinds of dislocations right now. So I called the SK chairman. I called all around the world to CEOs of these chip manufacturing companies. Some of them came to see me in Washington, others I talked with over the phone, and I asked them, what stands in the way of you building chips right here in America? Why are they all being built overseas? You know what the biggest reason was? Because it takes 5 years to permit a chip plant in America. With all the environmental regs and the way the bureaucracy and red tape works here, 5 years. At the rate of change, the rate of technological development, by the time the plant's ready to go up here in America, you're off to the next technology. It's obsolete. So I put in place legislation. It's a fast-track program to permit strategic industries like semiconductor chips 18 months instead of 5 years. Guess what? America just became competitive. Not going to be reported on the news because it's not controversial. 100 senators, 99 senators joined me in this. But this is how we win. This is how we bring it back, Jimmy. And I'm going to keep looking for opportunities like that. And we'll get more investments like SK and Ford here in Tennessee as a result of it. Thank you all very much.